Hi, everyone. I'm Betty Wong, the founder of Stage 2 Startups, Founders Over 40 Unconference, and this is my co-founder, Emily Smith-Kalbick. Well, Emily, we finally did it. We're launching this Unconference, which 3 years ago was an idea we were talking about with people like Ed and Elizabeth. So let's just say we're two women passionate about the right of people to be entrepreneurs at any age, and we decided to prove it. Now, before we get started, we want to acknowledge our advisors who gave us great support and guidance. Entrepreneurs Stella Lippashore, Charles Vassallo, Jeff Wright, and Ramon Gill. And Elizabeth Isele, of course, of Babson, Professor Edward Rogoff of Long Island University, Professor Jeremy Kagan of Columbia, Professor Ting John of University of Baltimore, and journalist Judy Messina. We also need to thank our sponsors, Mike Minatelli and Fran Neck, the AARP Foundation, and President Lisa Ryerson and her team, Jessica Wynn and Mark McDonald, Sonia Moyne and the team of IC, who work with the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Business Initiative, and Mike Haslin of the Global Center for Social Entrepreneurship Network for their help supporting this conference. And of course, our strategic partners. As you can see, there are so many that we really can't mention all of them, but you saw them and we will continue to send information from all of them. Finally, it would not have been possible to put this together, this conference, without our amazing team. Leslie Chan, Daniela Viola, Leslie Cabrera, Peter Kalbig, Tony Palladino, Deborah Albert, and Charlotte Tarmick. And the volunteers, Ben, Frank, Al, and Max, you know who you are. Thank you all for believing in us. So this is day one of a lot of great conversations, which we hope will spark a movement so that people of all ages, whether you're 20, 40, 60, 80, or 100, become founders. So there are 4 words that explain why we created Stage 2 Startups and why this Founders Over 40 Unconference is important. Longevity, passion, relevance, and money. Longevity is because we're all going to be living a very long time if we're lucky. Scientists predict people will be living until their 90s or 100s. As someone whose grandmother lived until she was 104, I want to make sure my second half is as interesting and fulfilling as my first half. So passion is something a lot of people have, and whether they want to save the world or just help a small part of it, like Ngozi Okara, Rajiv Jahad, Amy Wu, Elizabeth Isele, and all the rest of our speakers, well, basically, passion or making a difference is the key to what gets us up in the morning, keeps us up at night, makes some of us create the best for-profit companies and nonprofits in the world. My next word is relevance and how you want to show that you are. So for those of you who are over 50 or even hovering around 40, you will understand this need to be relevant. When you get to a certain age in your career or a certain age in your life, people are going to be trying to discount or replace you. So for those of you who are keeping up with the technology and everything else, you know you want to show that you have what it takes to be taken seriously. And my last word is money. You realize that if you live to 90 or 100, that you have to have a lot of money to spend if you retire at 50 or 60, right? And the Social Security safety net is actually going to be running out of money in the next 2 decades. So if you don't have $500,000 or so socked away, you might be in real trouble unless you can create a business or nonprofit that can pay you a sustainable salary. And creating businesses is all about creating side gigs or full-time businesses that can not only pay you, but hopefully make you an employer so you can contribute to the social support system rather than take from it. So for me, this Unconference is about longevity, passion, relevance, and money. Now, I'm going to ask Emily to share why we decided in 3 months to create this Founders Over 40 Unconference. And welcome to the Founders Over 40 Unconference.
Yes, so first, thank you everyone for joining us today. We're so excited you're here with us. So as Betty said, why did we believe now was the time to hold a conference exploring the different paths a second stage entrepreneur can take? Well, the most obvious reason is the pandemic. COVID has upended all our lives and caused many of us to reevaluate our priorities. Did you know that over 4 million people aged 60 to 64 quit their jobs between February 2020 and May 2021? So what's driving what NPR calls the Great Resignation? Well, they found that people are leaving their jobs in search of more money, more flexibility, and more happiness. So let's be honest, not everyone is leaving their job voluntarily. It's estimated that 42% of the job layoffs due to the pandemic are not coming back. And we know that older workers are more likely to be the employees impacted. But leaving a job voluntarily or not does not mean retirement in the traditional sense for our older worker today. Long before COVID, baby boomers and Gen X workers have been redefining life after working for someone else. The Transamerica Center for Retirement Studies found that over half of baby boomer and Gen X workers expect to work after the age of 65, either because they want to or because they have to. So it's not surprising that a recent survey by Guidance Financial found that 68% of people who start small businesses are between the ages of 40 and 69. So more and more people are looking to become their own boss after a career working for someone else. And today you can hear from other founders who did just that. They started a business or nonprofit after the age of 40. And that really is, they prove that you can be an entrepreneur at any age. And with that, I'm going to just turn over the microphone to our first speaker, who's Dr. Ed Rogoff. Ed is the professor and former dean of Long Island University Brooklyn School of Business, Public Administration, and Information Sciences. He teaches and conducts research in entrepreneurship, particularly relative to minority and later life issues. He's the author of several books, including the one you all received when you registered, The Second Chance Revolution, Becoming Your Own Boss After 50. Thank you so much, Ed, for that great gift. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Rogoff.
All right, thank you. Well, first of all, kudos to you and to Betty for creating this. It's a vast amount of work. Anyone who's done anything remotely like this knows this and appreciates all that you've done to create this day, this week, this month, however you want to call it. This is an extremely important topic. I got interested in this topic when I first did some research looking at entrepreneurship by age, and what I saw looking at the data was that the older a person was in the United States, the more likely they were to be an entrepreneur, the more likely they were to be successful, the more likely they were to create a large business. So, this is ignored by a lot of people, but the reality is it's a major thing that's gone on. As part of starting that, we did the first conference when I was at Baruch College. We did the first conference of sort of experts from different fields looking at this and looking at what the issues were. And it sort of confirms what the research was and confirms what I think a lot of your speakers are going to talk about today. So anyway, my main job this morning, I have the best job. I get to introduce Elizabeth, and I've known Elizabeth for quite a few years now. And she is an evangelist, an advocate, a thinker on the topic of later life entrepreneurship. So you're really hearing in a few minutes from somebody who's just absolutely fantastic. So let me give you a little bit of her background, be respectful of time. So she's the founder and CEO of the Global Institute for Experienced Entrepreneurship. She's a senior fellow at Babson College, which is academically sort of the center of entrepreneurship research and teaching in the United States. She's an associate fellow in finance and global economics at the Royal Institute of International Affairs, Chatham House in London. The Global Institute for Experienced Entrepreneurship, that she is the founder and CEO of, is a comprehensive cross-sector, meaning it covers business, government, education, and research ecosystems, and for the purpose of catalyzing and supporting intergenerational experience and the future of work entrepreneurship, and artificial intelligence. Elizabeth has been an advisor to the Obama White House, continues to be for Congress. You could do some good work there this week, Elizabeth. For the European Union, for the State Department, for the Organization of Economic Cooperation, the OECD, for the W20, the G7, the G20, et cetera, et cetera. She's spoken and advised many private sector corporations and NGOs worldwide. She's a fantastic person. She comes to this topic out of a real commitment to this issue. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce you to Elizabeth Isele.
Thank you, Ed. And thank you all for hosting this event, Betty and Emily especially. Ed and I go back many years, as he said, and I think none of us would actually be on this unconference call today without Ed Rogoff. When I first had the idea of people over 50 wanting to start a business and actually use the term senior entrepreneurship, the only person that didn't look at me as if I'd lost my mind was Ed Rogoff. And his book, written back in 2009, should be the Bible of this movement. And it is a movement. And I think that it is just as vital today because it is extremely engaging, extremely practical, really lays the groundwork for anyone over 50 or over 40 who wants to start the business of their own, becoming their own boss. And it is the second chance revolution, and we're all involved in this revolution. So I say, I would not be here without Ed and his endorsement and his really endorsing that I was totally sane and helping me move this forward, part of which I'll be describing. I'm going to be sharing some slides because there are a lot of data points that I really want you all to see, and research that I want you to see. Would be impossible for me to remember it as lucidly as a slide will project it for you. So I'm going to present some slides. At the very end, I'm open to all manner of questions you might have, because to me, that's the most vital part of an engagement like this, is the questions that come from the audience, because it's not just Elizabeth talking about what she thinks of value. I need to know what's of value to you, and we can address it. And Ed, I hope, will jump in and answer some of these questions as well. So now I'm going to share my screen to get to that slide deck. And let's see. Enter screen. Just 1 second, may take me a minute to do this. Betty, how do I get to my slide deck? I share the screen, but my slide deck doesn't come up.
All right, so if you should see a whole bunch of different options, and the presentation that you want to choose, click on that one. So you'll see your table, your desktop, and your presentation.
Let's see. Not yet.
If you can't find it, I will try to share my screen for you.
That would be excellent, Emily. That'll save some time for us.
Okay, let me see if I can get that up for you. Are you able to see it?
Yeah.
Yes, perfect. If
Okay.
you could put it into the full screen mode, that would be even better.
How's that?
That's great. As the screen says, that founded the Global Institute for Experienced Entrepreneurship, which we as an institute empower experienced entrepreneurs through education, training, advocacy, public policy, and research to boost prosperity for people of all ages. And that's going to be vital throughout this entire movement. It is not just boosting the prosperity of seniors, it's boosting the prosperity of people of all ages throughout the world. If you could do the next slide, Emily. the history of our organization, and Ed may recognize this logo, is that Ed and I really started an organization called Senior Entrepreneurship Works, which I love and still love that title and love that logo. And we started it, and it was on very shaky ground because so many people, were perplexed about what this was all about or how to make it happen. And if you could go to the next slide, Emily. Further in our history is when we had Senior Entrepreneurship Works up and running, and I would be delivering presentations or workshops in all different parts of the world. And I thought, I used all the time, I was always looking for an example that would help people understand what this is all about. And more times than I can count, I used the movie The Best Exotic Marigold Hotel, because I'm sure many of you have seen it back then. It was extraordinarily popular, and it was the premier example to me of how intergenerational entrepreneurship works. Because if you'll remember, you had the young person who had bought the Marigold Hotel who was just a disaster at running it, until Maggie Smith came along and made that not only operational, but she scaled it so that in the second movie, she was actually going back for venture capital money to build a second Marigold Hotel. So as I put this on the screen and I shared parts of the movie and the dialogue with people in these different convenings, they got it and they understood it. And it was absolutely perfect until the day that I got a call from Jeff Skoll's company. And Jeff Skoll, Participant Media, is the creator and producer of The Best Exotic Marigold Hotel. And on this call, I had met him at several conferences before, but on this call, he specifically said, I understand you've been using my movie in your workshops. And as anybody, especially me, knows, coming from publishing, I instantly went into panic mode, thinking of copyright infringement, et cetera, et cetera. So I started apologizing profusely. And he said, no, I'm not here in any kind of critical sense. And he said, in fact, for each of our movies, we design a social purpose campaign, which is the beautiful thing about participant media. He said, our movies are created to create social change. He said, and I wanted to ask if you'd be interested in creating a social change platform around this movie. And I by then had the courage and said, well, I really wasn't sure what he wanted. I didn't want to just create some award or something like that for senior entrepreneurs. And he very graciously said, well, what do you have in mind? And I said, what I have in mind is I have this theory that this is a cross-sectional movement and it can be an incredible economic engine. I said, but it's really at this point, and this was back in 2014, just theory. I said, I really would like an opportunity to host forums in 10 different cities around the world where we can bring together people from the public sector, the private sector, people from banking, people from education, economic development. I said, I want to bring leaders and change makers into a room, show them this movie, talk about the opportunity, and come out with a report that says, this is why people believe this is possible, and this is how it can happen through this cross-sectional collaboration. And he miraculously agreed to that and funded a 10-city global tour for Senior Entrepreneurship Works based on the work that we did with the Best Exotic Marigold Hotel. And that's how this transformed from Senior Entrepreneurship Works to a global institute where we continue to create and collate, curate all this information that hopefully makes people's lives easier, who are either trying to be a senior entrepreneur or people who are trying to support senior entrepreneurs and recognize the economic opportunity there. Next slide, please. And we call this the age of experience. Next slide. And this is one of my favorite slides because it's beware knights in shining armor. because they've never had their metal tested. So that's just a bit of humor that I like to infuse in these. Next slide, please. Seniors age 50 plus are the world's largest untapped natural resource, and it's growing phenomenally. The data around the fact that this demographic is growing by 3.2% annually compared to just 0.8% for the rest of the population has profound social and economic impact around the world. Next slide, please. And we need to look at the potential of this demographic. This demographic is exceeding anybody else on the planet. And this wonderful professor from Vienna, Sergei Sherbov, has wonderful reporting and talking about the fact that with this new longevity, we have to stop measuring age and future. It's time to measure age and future potential, as opposed to just a chronology of years lived. And this potential is what is this huge untapped resource. Next slide, please. And this is a long one to read, but it is extraordinarily important. So I put the entire thing up, even though I hate long slides, because it talks about innovation, and innovation in the older mind. Talks about innovation is much more than just having an idea. Real innovation is recognizing the value of that idea and operationalizing it by developing and deploying effective solutions to challenging and often systemic social, economic, and environmental issues. But the second paragraph is even more critical here because it talks about innovation not being just relegated to young entrepreneurs. Because research, and again, this is the research that Ed talks about and I talk about all the time. It is just not our wishful thinking. Research is documenting that older entrepreneurs actually can be more innovative than their younger counterparts.
That's the knowledge and the experience. This is just a visual representation of what I'm talking about. Is lots of us have all these little dots of knowledge in our minds, but it takes experience to be able to connect these dots. And the older your mind and the more experience you've acquired, you can really connect dots that other people don't see the relationship between those dots. So again, this is just another valued aspect of experience. And the next slide, please.
Okay, we're next slide.
Thank you. And this is a quote that I love from George Bernard Shaw. Because when we talk about ideas and innovation amongst older people, again, some people think that's kind of an oxymoron, but it is not an oxymoron. And this is one of the quotes from George Bernard Shaw that I love because it illustrates that we don't stop playing because we get old. We get old because we stop playing. And in our sense, and in starting a business and innovation, it's all about playing with ideas. So we don't stop playing with ideas because we get old. We get old because we stop playing. And that's when our mind just kind of grinds to a halt. Next slide, please.
Okay, we're at experience as a currency.
And then when we talk about experience, we need to talk about that it is an actual currency and it's a competitive advantage. Next slide.
Basic economics.
I want to give you some basic economics behind what I've been talking about theoretically. Next slide, please.
We're there.
The highest rate of entrepreneurship worldwide, and Ed alluded to this too, has shifted to the 55 to 64-year-old age group. This is data from the Kaufman Foundation. Next slide. Senior entrepreneurs are 2 to 3 times more likely to form a new business than they are to be involved in the gig economy. This is research that I participated in with the University of Michigan and the Understanding America studies. 5 years, and this one, nope, go ahead to the next one, that's great. This is an extraordinary statistic in that 5 years after startup, 70% of ventures established by senior entrepreneurs are still in operation compared to just 28% of enterprises launched by younger entrepreneurs. This is an incredible study out of Nesta.org, which is a nonprofit in the UK. Next slide, please.
And this is Jill
Jill
could tell
Cotello is an example
no
that no
matter
matter
how
how
small
small
the
the
business, it
business,
can
it
have
can
a
have
big
a big
community
community
economic
economic
impact.
impact.
Betty, we can now hear her.
She started a business. She was laid off from a technology firm in rural Wisconsin, or this was in Chicago, and her home was in Wisconsin. And she didn't know what she was going to do next because she couldn't get another job because of her age. So she decided to do something. She had always loved working with fabric art. And so she thought, well, why don't I see if I can make a business out of fabric art? And what she did is she gave herself a time frame of a year, and she said, I'm going to take $1,000 out of my account, and if I can't do it with a year and $1,000, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to pursue it anymore. So she actually she used her $1,000 to invest in a special kind of sewing machine that works on knits fabrics. And she started this incredible company where she would take sweaters that she bought in thrift shops or charity shops and tear them apart and re-sew them into this beautifully, uniquely designed fashion sweater. And her sweater, then she started selling them on the internet. And they became enormously successful. In fact, they were selling for upwards of $300 a piece. And she said that I don't think of myself as an entrepreneur because I'm just creating this in my home workshop like she is here and selling them online. And she said, I don't see that I'm boosting the local community. And I said, well, wait just a minute. I said, well, where do you get your supplies from? Well, I get them at the hardware store and the sewing store. And so I went through this whole litany of how this incredible ecosystem she had developed in terms of creating these sweaters. First place, she'd get them from the charity shop, so she's boosting their business. Then she sew them together again with new products, and then she had to mail them. And as I said to her, and what business in the United States right now is more in need of economic help than the US Post Office? And then she got it. She got how she could make a big difference. But it wasn't just that, because she ended up winning an award from the Environmental Protection Agency because she was saving all these different sweaters and products from the sweaters from landfills. So it was in a way a green business, but it was also a community economic development business. So my point is just the smallest entrepreneur can make a big community impact. Next slide, please. And then my other favorite aspect of this is the whole cross-generational experience. As I said, we increase prosperity for people of all ages, but we also need to be able to transfer the experience that we have as older adults to younger people. And as I say, in terms of silos collaborating instead of dividing us all into different silos. Next slide, please. We are job creators. A big criticism of senior entrepreneurs or older adults in the workforce is they're taking jobs away from younger people. But this study not this study, this actual program in 2016 from the EU created a 50+ entrepreneurship platform. And they created to support 50+ entrepreneurs to boost economic growth in the EU countries. But also, in addition to financing and policy support for the entrepreneurs, one of the purposes of this was to connect older entrepreneurs with unemployed youth, bringing the elders' life and work experience to millennials' technology expertise together. And then when they did that, they found they were launching more successful startups and simultaneously combating youth unemployment, which is currently at 20.9%. Double the EU average, with youth unemployment figures in some member states as high as 50%. So this is, again, the intergenerational aspect of it is beneficial for people of all ages. Next slide, please. This was the Nut and Ordinary, again, is the cross-generational experience because these two young men in Peterborough, New Hampshire, started a company called Nut and Ordinary, where they were creating plant-based products instead of a dairy products. And so they created a cheese out of cashews. And that's a little cashew nut in their logo. And they created it, they got the formula, they took it to local stores, and the local stores and co-ops thought it was absolutely fabulous. But these two young men said, well, we created a product, we know there's a market for it, but we have absolutely no idea of how to run a business. And so they took themselves to the local Rotary Club. And they knew that these older professionals in the Rotary Club could help them start that business. And they did. The two of them got together and they created all the business plans, et cetera, financing that they needed. And now this little company out of Peterborough, New Hampshire is a nationwide company with like 1,000 different outlets across the United States. It's a phenomenal experience, again, where this time the younger people actually reached out and sought the experience of the older business person. Next slide, please. And just looking forward, we have to look at and recognize and celebrate the people like Antonio Guterres, who said at the 2019 UN Day of Independent Older Persons Day, we must find more ways to help reach older individuals, continue to contribute, because they are key to achieving our sustainable development goals. So looking forward, we have to look for and really advocate and promote people who make public statements like this. Again, so it's not just Ed or Betty or Elizabeth making these statements. We all have to be advocates to advance this movement. So that's the end of the slideshow. And I think I'm very grateful to all of you to sticking with us as we worked our way through the technology aspects of that. And I hope I was able to make the points clear enough as we move through. I realize it was a little abrupt in places, but this is the point where I would love to receive your questions and to know specifically how we can best help you either move your business forward or move your community support ecosystem forward to support senior entrepreneurship.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. That was so informative. It just shows how great the experienced worker is in contributing to the economy. I will open it up to anyone who has questions. You can just write your question in the chat box and I will read it from there. But while I wait for those to come in, I do have some questions that were already submitted. And one question that came in, Elizabeth, for you was, do you see any differences between today and when you launched your business? Are there any different trends, different benefits for the experienced person to begin their company?
I think the real business difference today is the fact that people are beginning to understand the value of the older entrepreneur. And when I first started, and certainly when Ed wrote that book in 2009, and people thought we were, crazy, people understand now, are getting a better picture of this. When we were in different countries and there are different financial institutions who are actually getting a sense that investing in a senior entrepreneur is a good investment. When I first started this, banks would look at me and look at people my age starting a business and say, well, not possibly going to grant you a loan because you're never going to live long enough to repay it. And now people understand with this longevity revolution that we are indeed going to live long enough to repay it. And in fact, we are extremely responsible about repaying it. Younger entrepreneurs, more often than not, will start a business, and if it doesn't take off, will close that business and file for bankruptcy. I said it's very, very rare that an older entrepreneur is going to first close a business and then file for bankruptcy. So it's they have a lot of grit and determination, and not just that single-minded grit and determination to get to the goal, one of the most valuable things about senior entrepreneurs is they have the grit and determination to remain diligent and resilient. Because if it doesn't work the first time, how can I change this so that it might work in a different way?
Great, thank you. I love that we have grit and resilience. It is a great strength, I think, for anybody who's had years of working experience behind them. They know that setbacks can happen, but you just have to pick yourself up and move forward.
I think one other thing that is really different today is crowdfunding. And so people don't have to go to a traditional bank. It's crowdfunding. And one of the most underrated aspects of crowdfunding to me is that it's a huge market research opportunity. And you want to start a business and you put up an ad or a proposal on any crowdfunding site, and you don't get one person to contribute a single dollar towards that idea, you know instantly, that really is not going to gain any traction. So you can very quickly pivot. Whereas before you would apply to a bank and go through all kinds of paperwork, or the SBA or any organization, it took months. Now you can post something online and know practically within hours if that's going to succeed or not succeed.
Great. We have a question from Victoria Chapman. She has asked if you could repeat the source for the research that 70% of ventures started by seniors were going 5 years later versus only 28% of those started by others.
It looks like for some reason,
We seem to be
yes, we have lost her again. So I'm going to call her right now. Okay.
Hang in there, Victoria. We will get her back and get your question answered.
It came from an organization in England called Nesta, NESTA.org. If you email me, I can send you the complete link to the actual citation for that. Just email me at my Gmail account, just Elizabeth Isele at gmail.com. And I'd be happy to share that with you, or any of the other statistics citations that you might need that I quoted.
Okay.
We can also, if you are okay with it, Elizabeth, we could share your entire presentation to the attendees in a follow-up.
Gmail, happy
to. Did you hear that, Elizabeth? Oh, you're unfrozen now.
I did.
Okay.
Why do I keep freezing up? I know I live in Maine, but this is ridiculous.
I was just wondering if we could be sharing your full presentation to attendees in our follow-up email.
Absolutely.
Terrific.
So we have a third question.
Well, I wanted to first ask the second question, if you don't mind, and do it in order, from Dominic Tong, who wanted Elizabeth to comment on cultural differences in entrepreneurship in the USA versus outside, such as Europe, APAC, etc.
That's a really interesting question. The US is way behind most countries in the world. It's way behind Europe. It's way behind Australia, New Zealand, Japan. In fact, it's behind most countries in the world. And it's culturally, one of the most difficult assignments I ever had was I was invited by the State Department to talk about senior entrepreneurship in Japan. And it was wonderful speaking with all the different men in the culture who really got it. But the worst part of the assignment is they asked me to speak with 100 older women. And I thought, this is going to be really hard, because in Japan, of course, women resign from the workforce to raise a family, and less than 30% of them ever come back. So the idea of starting a business was daunting, to say the least. And I thought, to your point about culture, how can I make this culturally relevant for these women? And I was struggling and struggling and struggling. And then, like 10 days before I left for Japan, there was this incredible article in the New York Times about their fabulous bento boxes. And so I thought, that's it. I'm not going to put up slides and data and everything else for these women. My only visual presentation was a picture of one of their phenomenal bento boxes. And so the women were looking around at each other like, wow, we know what that is. And I said, I want to point out how you have been thinking entrepreneurially and acting entrepreneurially all your lives and just have never identified as an entrepreneur. So I took them through the whole building of that bento box. I said, and I did it step by step in terms of the same kind of principles that it takes to start a business are applied to what they did in creating their bento boxes, whether it was understanding their customer, who of course was their child. These were bento lunch boxes, understanding the market, sourcing the supplies. The creativity that goes into the boxes is just phenomenal. So it's creativity and innovation and activating on this idea. And slowly but surely, they understood those principles. But it wasn't until I got to the very last question. It was a very interactive presentation, which I really love. And so my last question to this audience was, I said, now this may be embarrassing. I said, but I would like everyone in this audience who wanted their child's bento box to be better than any others in the classroom to raise their hands. And they sort of looked at each other and giggled a little bit. And then every single woman in the room raised her hand. And then I knew they got it. So in terms of culturally, you have to meet the people where they are, but the same driving force is within people worldwide. They're thinking entrepreneurially. We're all thinking entrepreneurially because no one has ever had this extended longevity. So what are we going to do with it? How are we going to make it work? That is all entrepreneurial thinking. And so entrepreneurial thinking, it's a mindset. And that's what's uniformly moving across the world in terms of people trusting their entrepreneurial mindset. It's really fascinating to see in the way in which it's evolved in these past 10 or so years that Ed and I have been in the trenches.
Thank you. I have another question, which I think is very relevant for today, and that's how do people over 50 stay relevant with all the new technologies?
Well, you can see how resilient we were. We came back online or we used the telephone. People over 50, again, their online participation is huge. It is absolutely huge. Just take, for example, even people shopping online. The biggest market of online shoppers are people over 50. And to me, it boggles the mind that marketing, advertising people are not advertising more to this audience, because talk about a lost opportunity. They are very technologically savvy. My very first business that I started when I was just 60 was something called Cyber Seniors, where we taught seniors how to use the technology. And again, people thought I was a raving lunatic, and that why would seniors want to learn about technology? And I said, just give me a lab. If someone will give me a lab for Saturday mornings so I can test this idea. And so I got the lab, and I created a workbook called Very, Very, Very Basic Computers, which really started at the basics, like looking at the underside of a mouse and the wheel, etc. And they said, well, I don't know if anybody's going to come. And so that first Saturday morning, and I only wanted 12 people in the room. So people got, attention. And it was an intergenerational program because it's bringing the younger people in to help people learn how to use the technology. But just to cut that short, for people that think seniors don't want to learn about the technology or don't want to use it, we started with 12 seniors in a adult education lab one Saturday morning, and within 5 years there were 28,000 seniors in that program across the country. And today, all the statistics, there's tremendous data and statistics about how active and savvy seniors are online and with the technology.
Thank you. And I just love some of the comments coming in that it's not too late for anyone, even at 80 or 90. Okay, I have another question from Connie Chin. And she asks, she says, most examples of businesses, startups are started by a single person. How many or what percentage of these businesses turn out employing more people or becoming larger companies? I don't know if you have any insights for that.
And I don't know, I would just say, hesitate too, it's not just single individuals. The recent research we did with the University of Michigan is an incredible study, and it's still ongoing. And I was talking about this just the other day with Ed and Betty and Emily, is that we sent out surveys to 8,000 people, 8,000 seniors across the United States, to learn more about senior entrepreneurship and whether they were interested in or not. And the astounding response rate was 86%, which to any researcher is just like mind-blowing. Never, 5 or 10% is usually considered, extraordinarily good. So 86% was phenomenal. And one of the interesting comments that kept coming across is that the seniors were saying, I'm so glad you asked. I'm so glad you're interested in this for us. And, but to get back to your point, one of the questions was, are you willing to start a business on your own, or do you want to do it in collaboration with someone else? And the majority of the people responding to that said that they would prefer to do it in partnership with someone else. And a lot of that has to do with the facts that not everybody has all the skills that they need to start it and operationalize the business on their own. You may be a superb thinker, but you don't know, like the people from Ordinary don't know how to operationalize and scale a business. So they are all job creators, whether it's the individual woman like Jill in rural Wisconsin, she's creating jobs by making other companies hire employees. It's not just creating jobs through her business, though she has expanded and she has created jobs. So we are a job generator, and there's no denying it. And the biggest statistic of all, I think, and Ed might know this more clearly, is that small businesses in the United States have the highest hiring rate of any businesses in the country. So small business, something like 86% of new jobs are created by small businesses.
Thank you. I have just one last question, and it's actually going to be for both you and Ed. And that is, what advice do you have for our attendees today, if they're aspiring founders, new founders, or even established founders?
Ed, do you want to go first?
Okay, I'll go first. So first of all, I'm gonna pat myself on the back for my introduction to Elizabeth. You absolutely have not disappointed in any regard. A fantastic presentation, so thank you very much. And I learned a lot. I'm sure everyone learned a lot, and it's inspiring and it's fantastic. So I would say my advice to people who want to start a business, and it's generally the same for people of any age, is that keep in mind that entrepreneurship is a team sport. So, a lot of seniors think, oh my God, I can't do this. I don't know this. I don't know that. I'm not current about this or that. Well, perhaps, I doubt it, but perhaps the truth is that no entrepreneur brings everything to the table that they need to start and run their business. And so you need to think, how am I going to build a team to make this happen? So, that might include partners, it might include consultants, it might include an accountant, a lawyer, all kinds of people. So you need to think about it as, how do I get the configuration of everything I need to make this a success? And I think that older entrepreneurs need to not be defensive about that, because every entrepreneur faces that set of issues. So that's my advice. So, and thank you again, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ed. And my advice is, not surprisingly, very similar to Ed's. And we recommend that everybody thinking of starting a business create a brain trust. create a brain trust of people that have the skills and the experience that they don't. And you want a brain trust that is objective. You don't want your mother or your sister or your brother criticizing your idea, because they're going to say, well, that's a great idea. Meanwhile, someone from the brain trust will say, well, that's nice, but it's certainly not going to work. You need that kind of ruthless critique. So you need to reach out and find people either in your network or your past or in your social network that have the experience that can really evaluate and assess your idea and how valid that idea is. And I think the other piece of advice I would have is absolutely do not invest your retirement income. There are other ways to underwrite this business. And in fact, someone from the New York Times emailed me about a week ago and said, can you recommend some seniors who have started a business and use their retirement money to do that? And I said, in my gentle style, absolutely not. I said, it's the one thing that's the absolute. We have very few absolutes, but our absolute is do not, take money from your retirement fund to invest in a business. There's so many other ways. Like I said earlier, just start with something like crowdfunding and get the traction you need, so then you can present it if you need a loan or investment in your business. So those would be my 2 points: brain trust and no retirement funds.
Thank you. With that, let me just take you off. Ed, you just want to be on. I just can't. Let me just see if I can get to, well, I'm staying hidden, folks, but I just do want to say thank you, Ed and Elizabeth, for that informative discussion. Such a great start to our conference. That we are now at the end of our first session, everyone. But before we sign off and go to our first panel discussion, I would like to take a moment again to thank our sponsors, the AARP Foundation, FranNet, Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Businesses, and the Global Center for Social Entrepreneurship Network, as well as all our strategic partners for their support. We would not have been able to do this today without them.